Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to X Night Saint. This is Colin Bemis. This is crazy to me. I saw a film many times now called The Shift that Angel Studios put out, and I have the honor to talk to its director. I couldn't be more excited to welcome Brock Heasley onto the show. Brock, thank you very much for taking the time out to be with us today.
Oh, thank you, Colin. Those are very, very kind words of you for you to
Well,
say.
many more coming your way. So, so no, thank you so much for being here. So my first question in our what I would call our increasingly secular world,
Mhm.
what gravity did it have for you guys to make a film that was not only compelling and dramatic and beautiful, but that was inspired by the Bible and more specifically the book of Job?
Well, The Shift, for those who don't know, it's about a man who, he's an ordinary guy having trouble in his marriage, having trouble in his job, and he has this encounter with a mysterious stranger who, he's got some plans for our hero Kevin, and basically their encounter doesn't go so well, and as a result of it, Kevin is banished to a dark parallel world where he is then fighting to get back to his world and the woman he loves, which sounds exactly like Job in the Bible. You were correct. No, it doesn't sound anything like Job in the Bible. So in bringing this story to the screen and putting it out there, hey, kind of very much inspired by Job. That was the biggest battle. Is like, how does this story that I've just described, this sci-fi story, we're dealing with alternate realities. We're definitely in science fiction. How does that then pair up with anything from the Bible? And that was the challenge from the very beginning, is just to even
Yeah,
explain what this thing is, because the shift isn't based on a book. It's not based on a comic. It's not based on a TV show.
yeah,
So often these days, there's very, very few films that are released that are just an original idea. And so the closest we could get to that was to say, oh, well, it's inspired by Job, which is 100% true. And I think
yeah,
you've seen it. And I think people who do see it, they understand upon seeing it. Oh, yeah, I get how it ties into Job. Going into it, people are kind of scratching their heads like, I don't see how that's possible. Um, but that for me as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, I mean, that's what was exciting. I like a lot of different kinds of movies. I like a lot of different kinds of genres. Science fiction happens to be my favorite, but my faith is also very important to me.
yeah,
And the fact of the matter is there are not a whole lot of sci-fi stories that also deal or take faith seriously.
yeah.
And as someone who is a fan of, if I can say being a fan of faith, I don't think you can, but I'll say it just for the purpose of this conversation, and a fan of science fiction, combining the two of them just seemed very obvious to me
Yeah.
in terms of why not, because science fiction is such a great vehicle for all kinds of stories and all kinds of ideas and topics, and why not faith? And um, so yeah, so bringing these two things together and telling this story, for me, for what I'm interested in, for the kinds of things the stories that I want to tell, for the kinds of movies that I haven't seen that I wish I could see, the shift is kind of a result of all of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love it. There's something really special too about creating the thing that you want to see. I
Hmm.
mean, when you're not seeing it, when you're not seeing whether it's seeing your faith reflected in film or whether it's just like you said, sci-fi, and kind of mixing those things together, it's really a great opportunity to be able to create the product that you wish was out there in the world. Because a lot of people feel the same way. A lot of people want to see things that reflect their beliefs and their morals and their faith. And you certainly succeeded in that. So speaking of that, I know that in 2017 you made a short film of the same name. Was that to you when you were making that in 2016 or into 2017? Was that for you like a proof of concept, with the whole end game always being turning it into a feature?
I wish it had been.
Yeah,
That would have been a lot more clarity than I had at the time. At the
fair.
time I made that short film, when we first made that short film, just a month earlier, I had been house manager at a haunted house. And
Wow.
that is not what I went to college for, believe it or not. I had a year prior to that, I had ended a 15-year career as an art director and as a graphic designer. That's what I studied in
Okay.
college. and the pivot to filmmaking came out of the blue. It wasn't something I'd ever
Wow.
considered doing. And so when I decided, hey, I want to see if I can write and direct, because I'd always loved movies, and I had kind of, dipped my toe into the filmmaking world as a result of prayer. Actually, it was something that, as I struggled to find a new job and wasn't able to, it was something that my wife and I prayed about. What in the world should I do next?
Yeah.
And an opportunity had presented itself to dip my toe into indie filmmaking for no money.
Yeah.
And instead of making money, my wife and I, we received the answer that no, I should explore this opportunity and see where it leads.
Wow.
And where it led to was one day realizing, oh my goodness, I know everybody I need to know to put something small together and to see if maybe this is something that I'm capable of doing.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to create the Shift short film, which you can still watch, you can find that on YouTube, on the Angel Studios YouTube channel. Um, I basically wrote my first script and decided to direct it myself just to see if I could do it. That was really the point. I took an old
Yeah.
story out of Mothballs about a guy meeting the devil, and that I had written years earlier, just as a short story, turned that into the script, and then we were off and running. We shot the thing over 3 days, 3 different weekends at the end of 2015. And because everybody was working for free, essentially, I had $500 to my name, and I used that to, buy everybody food.
Yep.
Um, but I had no idea what I was doing it for, other than the fact that I just felt compelled to do it. I really just wanted to see if I could write and direct, if that was something that I was capable of doing. And thankfully, the short turned out a lot better than I had expected, a lot better than anybody had expected. And when Angel Studios saw it, who were just barely gearing up The Chosen at that time,
Yeah.
um, they saw something special in it, and now here we are years later. I just skipped over a bunch of stuff, but now here we are years later, and the feature film has come out. But no, to answer your question in a much shorter fashion, no, I had absolutely no idea I was ever going to turn this thing into a feature film. No
That's
idea at
it.
all when I made that short.
That's incredible. What a story. I love the fact that uh that you prayed on it and came to the conclusion of pursuing filmmaking. But what was your history like before that as a storyteller? Like from
Mhm.
childhood into your adulthood? I mean, you mentioned a short story, but how much did art and creativity play a factor into your? I said you were a art designer, graphic designer.
I was a graphic designer. Yeah,
Okay.
so art was always really important to me. I mean,
Sure.
from when a really young age, I was the kid who, I'd be lost for hours in sketchbooks
Yeah.
and just drawing and drawing and drawing. And that's really how people knew me. They like I was the kid at school who, I did the cartoons for the school paper, and
I
but
love
that
it.
was really my focus, was illustration.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 28 years old when I first sat down and wrote something just for fun, just to be creative. And that was kind of at the time, like, blogs were emerging as a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I can remember the first blogs that I wrote, which some of, which was kind of a mix of, like, here's stories from my life, and here's some fictional stories. Like, it was kind of an anything goes era, but people would make fun of me for writing a blog. Like, a blog was something that was hysterical for some reason, like internet dating was at one time,
Yeah.
that it was
Perpetually
just,
uncool for some reason, blogging.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's hard to imagine now because everybody, is
I know.
sharing everything on the internet. But there was a time when to share things on the internet was just kind of looked down upon.
Yeah.
But it was fun. I loved the idea that I could write something, and then literally 30 seconds later, 10 people could read it and give me feedback.
Yeah.
And that was really, really fun. And there weren't a lot of people doing it. So it was a time in which I could publish something on MySpace, which is what the big platform was at the time.
I
And
miss MySpace.
I do too, actually. It
It's
had
so
it was
good.
terrible, but it was also really good. And it was
Yeah.
really good to, like, it was easy to capture an audience. That was what
Yeah.
I found, is that I could, as a nobody, I could publish something, and the way MySpace worked, a lot of people would see it immediately. And so
Yeah.
I attained this following, and I was 28. And so once I started developing a love for writing, I wrote a few books, I wrote some comics. And so writing was just something that I really took to and did a whole lot of. Again, never really thinking of getting into screenwriting.
Yeah.
That was something that came later when I was kind of forced into it, when I had no job and no real path. And then yeah, I mean the Lord put me on the path.
Yeah.
That's really genuinely, truthfully how that all happened.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's incredible too that if you're out of a job and you're looking for a path, luckily God put you on it, but making films is a rough a rough transition into a career. As
It's
you,
just about the worst one you could make, yeah,
yeah,
because there is no money. For years, I
yeah,
didn't earn a wage,
yeah,
and I still don't know. We're not rich, like I
yeah.
don't know how honestly we got through that, but we did because it was the right thing.
No, like yeah, like you said, God put you on that path. Um,
Right.
so I one thing specifically, there's a lot of things about the shift that I want to talk about, but the production design of that film
Hmm.
blows my mind, as do the locations. So, and now knowing your history a little bit too, a little bit more about it, how much of a hand did you have in the production design? And if you could walk me kind of through, because the look of it is so incredible. And again, I know that's tied into the locations that you got, but can you walk me a little
Yeah.
through of where you shot it and as well as the production design and its development?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for saying that. We had
Of
a
course.
fantastic production designer on this by the name of Catherine Tucker. She and her team were just incredible. And, we're an indie film. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we had money. We did. And, we had more money than I've seen in my life. But in film terms, we had very, very little money. And
Yeah.
so we had to make a lot out of a little. Every step of the way, and Catherine and her team, they really did a fantastic job with that. Um, this film was shot in Birmingham, Alabama, and that was not a place that I ever thought I would shoot a film. No, nor was it a place I'd ever actually been to. We originally were going to set up in Atlanta, Georgia,
Okay.
but Atlanta is kind of a second Hollywood, which is why we thought of it.
Yeah.
But it also means that there's a lot of competition for crews and cast, and the locals are kind of like, another film, you
Yeah.
know. And so we were running into some headaches in Georgia that we just didn't anticipate, and we on a whim, 2 months before we were set to shoot, on a whim, we went over to Alabama. My producer on the film, Ken Carpenter, who is largely responsible for assembling the team on this film, he had shot a film in Birmingham, Alabama years ago, and he
Okay.
just had this inkling that, you know what, maybe the world that we need to set up, maybe we can find it in Birmingham. And so we went over there on a whim, just drove from Atlanta to Birmingham, and we found this incredible city filled with amazing food, really kind people, and because of the economic hardships that Alabama or that area part of Alabama has endured, we found these really great locations that were just broken and beaten
Yeah.
down. And then we found these other really nice parts of town, and they were kind of sitting side by side. And very quickly, I mean, literally within an hour of arriving in Birmingham, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the place. Like, I
Wow.
know that it's going to be a massive headache for us to like completely change our location 2 months before we shoot this movie, but I think it'll be worth it. I think we're going to save a lot of time and a lot of money by
Yeah.
going here. And the team agreed, and it was 100% the right choice. So a lot of what you're seeing as far as the scale of the film and just how cool that, a lot of that is Birmingham, and the other part of it is Catherine and her team. They really grabbed onto this idea of, we're doing a dystopian world that's not too far off from the world that we know,
Yeah.
but they tweaked that world just enough to make it feel like, okay, this is a really really rough place to be in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel completely foreign, and I think that that's the thing I love about the look of the movie, is that it's taking place in a reality we recognize, but not one we want to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's incredible too. And one of the things that my wife and I talked about a lot was the how reflective the film is of a not too distant future, and many elements of it are what we are experiencing now. So I think that the production design of the locations really reflected that and reflected that thematically. Did you say it was 3 months before Principal that you guys made the location
two
move? Two,
two
two
months before
months.
principal that we made the location move.
That
Yeah,
must have been
yeah.
terrifying.
It was completely terrifying because at that
I'm
point
just thinking,
you're,
imagining that drive, like,
yeah, no, it was
uh,
crazy. And it was, and this was right before Christmas. So, I say 2 months, but we also knew we were losing 2 to 3 weeks
yeah,
in within those 2 months because everything Hollywood, not that we're Hollywood, but we draw from Hollywood,
yeah,
and the film industry just totally shuts down during Christmas. There's just
yeah,
nothing that's going on. And so we didn't even get most of our teams in place until a month before we actually shot. It was really when people
it's
started
just,
arriving.
it's a stressful,
Um,
yeah,
it was very stressful, but again, like, if no matter how much sense something doesn't make, if you feel like you're, if you're being led by inspiration, if you know that, okay, this is the right thing to do, then it's the right choice. It just is, no matter what the obstacles are. And that was something that, we kind of sought the entire way, that I've sought the entire way through this
yeah,
entire process. I never would have made it through otherwise. There's no reason that I, as a first time filmmaker, had a $7 million budget.
yeah,
There's no reason for me to have that.
yeah,
That's a huge leap to go from a $500 short film to a $7 million budget with the crew and the cast that we had. I know exactly how fortunate I am, and I know exactly what the source of that fortune is.
yeah.
And I know that it's a rare position that we were all in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, uh, in terms of the journey from the short film into making your first feature film, um, do you mind talking a little bit about Angel Studios and kind of what that um the submission, like, kind of how that came about from turn how you actually got it made into a feature film?
Yeah. So what it looked like for me, because anybody listen, because I know a lot of people right now, Angel Studios just released 4 films in 2023.
Yeah,
Prior to that, they had released no films. So they're moving very, very quickly.
yeah, they are.
And they're very attractive to a lot of filmmakers. So I have a lot of filmmakers approaching me and asking me, trying to divine from my experience what their potential experience with Angel Studios might be.
Sure.
And I go so far back with Angel Studios that my experience with them doesn't necessarily translate to what
Yeah,
somebody else's experience is going to be. The process right now is very different from the one that I had. The one that I had was a little bit more traditional as far as how the way Hollywood works, and then also wildly, wildly different.
yeah,
Um, so I back in 2018, when I first talked with Angel Studios, they were actually known as VidAngel Studios, and they had two arms to their company. One of which was a streaming service called VidAngel, which is still around today, but they've separated
yeah,
from the studio. And that streaming service basically filters content on Netflix and Amazon and streaming services like that, so that you can take out the nudity and the sex and the language and the graphic violence and things like that. It's a really, really great service. I use it pretty much every day. But they also on their site, they have a place that original content can live and be seen. And they had a few things up that I thought were really interesting. And that I thought were tonally not too dissimilar from this little short film that I'd made not too long ago,
yeah,
and called The Shift. And I thought, you know what? This little short film I've made, this sci-fi faith thing that everybody told me, why did you make this? No one is ever going to watch it because this is such a weird mashup of genres. Like, if you want something to be put into the world, Hollywood understands boxes, and you're so far
yeah.
outside of the box on this, like no one is going to watch this. And
Or
I
it's
thought, well, that's
this
fine.
meets that. Everything
Right.
is The Rock
Right,
meets,
right.
like, Working Girls or something. It's like the bizarre. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was very hard to break the shift down that way. But when I saw what Angel was doing, I realized that, okay, here's a company that's looking at stories that deal with faith in a different way.
yeah,
Like, I saw, the work of Dallas Jenkins, for example. He had the pilot for The Chosen
yeah,
was up there, and that pilot is kind of dark. It's not, super brightly well lit. It's not afraid to show suffering, and these were not things that I associated with faith films or
yeah,
faith content, especially back in 2018. There was a very fixed idea of what that could be, an idea that I honestly rejected. I had not seen too many faith films because I'd watch the trailers and be like, oh, well, that's not for me.
yeah,
Um, and so The Shift was very much kind of a reaction to my impression of faith film, less the actuality of them, because I didn't watch that many of them.
yeah,
Um, so I submitted it to VidAngel with the hopes that the short film could go on their online site and I could make a little bit of money. That
Yeah.
was really the goal. But they saw it and they said, well, shoot, this is really interesting. And we're trying to create more things. And, do you have more to this story? And by then I had enough time with it that I did have some ideas about how to turn this into a feature film. I pretty much had the entire film kind of just in my head. And so I said, yeah, you know what? I'd love to turn this into a feature film. And they said, well, great, we'd love to help you do that.
Wow.
And the way that Angel Studios helps filmmakers do that is through crowdfunding.
Yeah.
And so within a couple of years, because it took a while to figure it out how to do it properly, we did. We took this short film, we put it in front of the world, and we said, "Hey, world, if you think this is interesting, you'd like to see this into a feature film, invest your money."
Yeah.
And that's different than something like Kickstarter, where you are, you're basically hoping for a T-shirt or something. This is people actually investing. It's actually something that is fairly recent and fairly new,
Yeah.
where the average person can put in money into a film. Not a rich person, just an average person. Put even a small amount of money into something and help fund it, and then they can get a return if the thing is successful. And so we did this with the shift, and it took a while. The Chosen took off like a rocket.
Yeah.
When it did take off, I know they struggled for about a year to get people to pay attention to it. I had to struggle for a few years
Yeah.
to get people to pay attention to the shift, and so we ended up doing 4 rounds of crowdfunding. It really helps to have something that's known, and the shift was not known. And so it took us a while to raise enough money to really get going. And then even then, privately, we had to raise even more money to get the full budget. But by the time we were done with all of that process, which involved a lot of live streaming and interviews like this,
Yeah.
and just it was a lot of work, even just to do those crowdfund raises. And by the time I had done all of that, I felt like I had made the movie 4 times over. That's how much effort goes into these
Yeah.
things. But we were eventually able to get the money, and then we were turned loose to go and make the movie. And Angel Studios was great to work with in that sense. When they would visit the set, but never tell me what to do, and never tell my
What a
team how it should
dream.
go. Yeah, it was great. And so we got to make the movie that we set out to make, and
Yeah.
that's something that I don't take for granted. It was a pretty incredible experience.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think what Angel has done is really incredible. I think the idea of I've had a lot of conversations about self-distribution, and I think that their model of investing at any level, but you're not. Yeah, the big thing with crowdfunding is, like you said, you're and my problem with it in the past fundamentally is that you're just asking people for money. So
Hmm.
which is okay, but if for $100 and you get a T-shirt, like most people aren't going to want a T-shirt. I mean, they might,
Right.
but it's this idea where
Yeah.
what Angel is doing is really rewarding people with not only an investment, but it's also direct to consumer. So like I am going to pay for what I want to see. And it
Right.
takes a lot. It takes time to build that, but I think they've done a really remarkable job. I mean, when I went on Sunday, my wife and I watched the shift again, and you're up to like 600,000 views already, I think, or something like that. It mentions it on Angel Studios, and I think they
Oh,
just
well, you're
added it.
seeing something I haven't looked at. Did you
Oh,
watch it? Did you watch it in the Angel Studios app, or did
yeah.
you go to the theater? It's
Well, no,
in the
I've seen
app.
it. I
Okay,
saw it
cool.
in the theater as well, but on Sunday
Oh,
when I
cool.
watched it, it was on the Angel Studios app.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
but either way,
Yeah,
it's a remarkable. That's such a wonderful story too. But it's remarkable. I just love the direct consumer model and giving your
yeah.
audience directly the opportunity to invest and to pay for what they want to see and to vote with
Hmm.
on what they want to see. I just think it's really powerful. Um, let's talk about the cast of this movie because, like you
Yeah.
said, it kind of like tangential to Hollywood. I mean, you have an incredible cast for this film. From Christopher Palaha, obviously you have Neal, you have Elizabeth, you have so many people, Sean Astin.
Hmm.
What was the casting process like? Especially coming in, you made the short film years prior. What you had in mind as you were like daydreaming about it to this incredible cast that you ended up with. What was that whole process like for you guys?
Oh, that was one of the more stressful processes
Imagine.
of the film. There's a really, I don't know who said it originally, but there's this idea that, basically a good director, 90% of their work is done if you cast correctly. Like if a movie is good and it works, and a director does a good job, most of that work is before the camera even rolls. You've got to
Yeah.
find the right cast. And Ken Carpenter, my producer, he was really the one who pushed for, let's get a really good ensemble cast. Let's cast even the smaller parts. Let's get really great actors in those roles. And I'll admit, I went into the film thinking, let's get big stars, and then we'll just fill out the rest of the cast with whoever.
Yeah.
Because that's it's there's a certain type of thinking, economic thinking in Hollywood that says that that's the wise move. And Ken wisely said, "No, we need a really strong cast." The great news is that by the time we were done, we ended up getting really big stars anyway, and we had a really strong cast to support them. Um, but the process was not short, and it was stressful because, look, as a first-time director, you're up against a lot with the casting process.
Yeah.
You've got agents who are looking at you like, not only are they looking at you like, "Oh, can you really even direct a movie?" They're just wondering if the money's even gonna show up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's half of it right there. It's just convincing their agents that the money's gonna actually be there. Because, a lot of people are talk. A lot of people talk big, and a lot of movies, far more movies are prepared or try to get going than ever are actually made.
Yeah.
And agents know this, managers know this, actors know this. And so while they're excited for offers, they're gonna look at each one with kind of a justified skepticism.
Sure.
So it took some time, and there were some actors we went out to that I don't even know if they ever even saw the script. Maybe we got blocked at the agent. It's a very typical experience.
Yep.
But but we there were without going into any specifics, there were some people, some parts for which we got our first pick and other parts for which we didn't, and that's just the normal process. By the time we got down to the end, which was just before shooting, it was really clear. And again, this is where I have to recognize the hand of providence on things, because I do believe that plays a part, and certainly has played a part in this film. There were people that we were prevented from casting, and I will
Yeah.
always be grateful for that, because when I look at this film and I look at who we got and I look at the way that they performed those roles, I don't see any weak links. I don't see anybody where I'm like, oh, I can just imagine how this actor maybe that we approached months ago
Yeah.
would have done a better job. Like, I don't feel that way, and I know it's not true. Um, and it's incredible when you look at who we have, because we have such. I mean, yes, we had Neal McDonough, who plays the benefactor,
So
our
good.
bad guy, and he's such a great bad guy. He's plays so many bad guys, and yet he gave us a completely different performance from anything I've ever seen him do
Yeah.
in this film. It really is a remarkable piece of work. And then Chris Palaho, you mentioned, who's our lead, who's in basically every single scene, which is very unusual for a film. Usually, there's the load is shared a bit more.
Yeah.
But with Chris, he was in everything, and he really bit into this role. And he was one of the last people cast.
Really?
We cast him about a week before we started shooting.
Wow.
Um, and that was a stressful time,
Can
because
imagine.
Chris was one of those guys that whose work I wasn't as familiar with. And so he was somebody that Ken was constantly saying, "You got to look at this guy, you got to look at this guy." And when I finally did, and it was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the guy."
Yeah.
And why in the world did
What
I
a
wait so
moment.
long?
Yeah.
And so thankfully, though, he was just coming off of a film that he was doing, a Christmas film. He finished that on Friday, and he started our movie on Monday. That's how
Wow.
quick Chris had to turn around, and thank goodness he did. Most
Yeah.
actors, a lot of actors would have said, "Heck no, I'm going home to my wife and kids. I'm taking a break."
Yeah.
But Chris read the script, and he was so excited by it, he knew he had to do it.
Amazing.
And then in our support, and you mentioned Elizabeth Tabish, who
Yeah.
played Molly. She's our female lead. She was actually the first person cast.
Wow.
And I'll always be grateful to Liz for that, because she was the first actor to take a leap with me and say, you know, I believe in you and I believe in this, and let's go for it.
Yeah.
And that really helped us to bring on Liz plays Mary Magdalene in The Chosen, for those who are unfamiliar. And Liz was helped us bring along some of her castmates. We got Paras Patel, who plays
Yeah.
Matthew in The Chosen. He plays a character named Rajit. And then Jordan Walker Ross, who plays Little James in The Chosen. He came aboard in a cameo role as Brendan, which is a jerk boss that Kevin has, and completely different from anything you've seen Jordan do on
Yeah.
The Chosen, which is really fun. But then, yeah, we got Sean Astin, who is somebody that, you know, I was the perfect age for Goonies. When
Yeah.
that came out, I wanted to be Mikey. And that meant I wanted asthma. I wanted to be afflicted with asthma. I wanted an inhaler, you know, and I didn't even know what asthma was. I just knew that Mikey had this
You wanted
inhaler,
it.
and I wanted that, and I wanted to need that so that I could be cool and puff on it. Um, that's how a kid's brain works.
Yes, it is.
And you know, and I don't need to give you Sean's resume. Everybody knows Sean, but working with him was an absolute, you know, little kid dream come true. But what a prince of a guy, and what an incredible performance he gave us in a very, I'm not going to spoil it, but for those who know Sean Astin, familiar with his work, I think that this is a role that will surprise you
Yeah.
in what he does in this film. Um, I mean, look, I'm just going through the cast one by one. That's probably not what you're asking for here, but
No, no, it's
but
great. There. It was just I truly too was blown away by the cast. You know, we I've watched a lot of Hallmark movies over the past like 3 months. It's something that I
uh-huh.
recently had gotten into, and so my wife and I became huge fans of Chris. So and of course being in the shift too, but the whole
Right.
cast was just really remarkable. Um, so you should gush
Yeah.
over them, Brock. They deserve
Yeah.
to be gushed over. Um, so I want to transition into, and we've talked about it a little bit. Obviously, The Shift is a wonderful example, but in terms of your career,
Mhm.
and as we talked about a little bit in terms of how you got into filmmaking, what role does and has faith played in your development and your creative development and also your
Mhm.
transition into filmmaking?
Yeah, well, I never would have transitioned into filmmaking without my faith. I mean, that was a matter of faith. It was too big a leap to make. I mean, look, I made that leap when I was in my late 30s. That's when I
Yeah.
decided to become a filmmaker. And that's, generally speaking, that's way too late. I've never been to film school. You know, I loved movies. I'd always loved movies. You know, I was in my job at work um, because illustration and design is very much a right-brained activity. I
Yeah.
would often, with my left brain, as I was designing and drawing, listen to DVD commentaries. I had a little portable
I
DVD player
love
that I
it.
set up at my desk, and I wouldn't watch the movie so much, but I'd be listening to the commentary. And I just did that for years, just, you know, even revisiting some favorite ones. Not because I ever aspired to get into filmmaking, but simply because I love film and I
Yeah.
love knowing how they're made. It's just something I've always been curious about.
No,
So by the
I don't want
time
to. I don't want. So
yeah,
I'm
go
so
ahead.
sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. It's very rude of me. Is there a favorite commentary or two? Because because that's essentially what all of us film lovers had like before podcasts.
Right.
Was you would watch or listen to commentaries. Are there one or two that like you remember that you obsessed over? Because there's so many good ones.
There are so many good ones. Look, anytime Roger Ebert would do a DVD commentary,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, those were always my favorites. Like the
Yeah.
one he did for Citizen Kane is incredible.
Love it.
Obviously, he's not the director of Citizen Kane, but he comes in with his keen eye in that commentary, and he just breaks that movie down. And
Yeah.
if you watch Citizen Kane, and you're not convinced of its brilliance, listen to Roger Ebert's commentary on the film, and then see if you don't understand at that point just
Yeah.
how revolutionary that film was and how remarkable it is. So I loved those deep dives. You know, Peter
Yeah.
Jackson's commentaries on the Lord of the Rings movies are always going to be favorites as well, just because of the monumental undertaking that film was. That series of
Yeah.
films was. So yeah, I mean I always liked the ones that really went deep
Yeah.
on not only just process but also the storytelling. That was what was always more interesting to me. And Roger Ebert, because he wasn't involved in the making of Citizen Kane, he really approached that film as as the literary piece that it really is.
Yeah.
And so he's pointing out all these things that perhaps the filmmakers intended, maybe they didn't, it doesn't matter. They're in the film, and he found them, and he uncovers them, and it's great.
Yeah.
So that's a favorite.
Love it.
But
Sorry to
yeah, so
interrupt you.
that's no. That's totally fine. So that's how I came across my love for film, but never with the goal to get into it. So that was a matter of faith. And then once I got into it, I mean, yeah, I mean, look, I think every piece of art has a message. I think that message is usually more powerful when it's not the thing that drives the art. I think as a filmmaker, my job one is to entertain. It really is. And I think when you lead with with message, I think you're going down the wrong path. I think you're making something else that isn't a movie, that just isn't, it isn't putting the audience first, in my opinion. But I think that any artist, who they are as a person, what their moral compass is, what they are most concerned about, and what moves them is going to make its way through into the art, and that's where the message emerges from. That's what you're saying to people. And for me, um, being a faithful person, being a spiritual person, being someone who has had profound experiences in my life, um, that related to faith, it is only natural for that to emerge into the work that I make. And I think that that is, for me, I think that's the right approach. I think that's the way to do it. I figure out what the story is, and then try to figure out what it's saying within that, or maybe not, just let it emerge.
Yeah.
But I think with everything I've created, I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that that piece of who I am isn't present in some way. And the shift is very obvious how it's present.
Yeah.
That's probably the most faith forward thing I've ever written or created. Um, I think going forward, I don't know that you'll ever see something that's that blatant about it from me. Not that I'm not willing to explore matters of faith. I am, and I will continue. In fact, the film I'm hoping to do next, I've already written it, and it very much
Oh,
is
so exciting.
open, but it's not as overt as the shift is. It's not, also not trying to break your brain as much as the shift is, but it goes into that territory, and I imagine I'll continue to make things like that. But I'm not opposed to doing something that doesn't put the faith so much on the surface. Maybe I'll put a little bit more under. But I think regardless of whether it's over or under, the values that I hold, and what I know about life and the universe, and what is right and what is wrong, all those things that I get from my faith, those are always going to come through in some way. I think if I'm being true to myself, and I'm being true to something that's honest, I think that that's inevitable.
Yeah, that is incredibly beautifully put. And to add to that a little bit, I think that one of there's this aura around things that are considered faith-based, and it's something that, like,
Mhm.
I've had a lot of conversations about, but you alluded to it earlier. But the idea of, like, and I'm not going to call it any specific ones, but I feel like what Angel Studios has been doing over the past number of years, and certain other projects as well, is it, having the element and the moral compass and the passion of faith thematically in the work, but it's not necessarily like, even with the shift, like you said, it's entertainment first, but it also has these messages. And I think there's this kind of a
Mhm.
certain aura about films, and I haven't seen a lot of them either that were made in like the 90s and the 2000s, where, and it's not a knock against them, and I haven't seen many of them, but I think that it's the idea of, like, this is the message, and then we're going to build the story around the message. And there's nothing
Right.
wrong with that. But when you start with a very strong, very potent story, and then make sure that faith is an element of it, I think that it becomes a lot more profound, because then you're balancing entertainment with thought-provoking content. You're balancing
Mhm.
entertainment with getting people to tune into it a little bit more. And I think that's something that the shift does beautifully, is that it is unbelievably entertaining and unbelievably moving, but simultaneously all of those elements of faith are not only there but super present, but they are ever more present because it is entertaining and because you are moved, if that makes any sense. So I think you strike an unbelievable balance, and I think Angel does that really well as well.
No, I appreciate that, and I Yeah, no, I think that that balance is really important because if you're not entertaining people, who cares what the
Yeah,
message is? Like,
exactly.
I'm not,
Yeah.
if I'm in church, I'm not expecting to be entertained.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are. I'm not. In
Yeah.
fact, I would rather not be entertained at
Yeah.
church,
That's not why you're there.
especially, it's not why I'm there. And especially as someone whose entertainment is my job,
Yeah.
I recognize that within entertainment is a certain amount of performativity, a
Sure.
certain amount of falseness, a certain fiction that is happening. And when that fiction is honest, I think it's fine. And what I mean by honest fiction is I mean a movie. A movie is honest fiction.
Yeah.
I know when I'm stepping into a movie that I'm seeing something that is false, that I'm seeing something that is fictional, that I'm seeing something that is a presentation. I think when it comes to church, if I can get on the soapbox for just a little bit, I'm looking
Please.
for something a little bit more genuine, something that's articulated through with integrity and with honesty. And if you're trying to entertain me within that, then I get suspicious.
Yeah.
Then I wonder what's really being sold. And then I wonder what's really being felt. And I wonder if what I'm seeing, what emotionally or otherwise that's being exhibited, I wonder if it is performative or if it is genuine. I would rather be bored in church, and I'd like to be entertained at the movies because I want to feel the truth, and I feel the truth more when it's not layered with entertainment. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's the
But I
mixture too,
think
like
when
you said, of
something,
truth and
yeah, go ahead.
honesty. Sorry, but yeah,
Yeah,
the being honest, and so like the idea of like you were saying before about um the honesty in storytelling, but if you approach it as a filmmaker honestly, you're going to get that truth. Like if you're coming at it from that place, then it will resonate. But I totally get what you're saying about the dichotomy, obviously between entertainment and between church for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And so, and look, when it's an honest fiction, when it's honestly presented as fiction, you're going, and I think there's great truths that can happen within that. Absolutely. I mean, that's why I made the shift.
Yeah,
I think the shift is ultimately at the end of the day, I think it's communicating some pretty profound truths, but it's doing it within this fictional reality or this fictional unreality,
yeah,
which I think is an honest way to approach things. But yeah, I'm not doing a sermon. If I want a sermon, then I'll go to church, and then I expect a sermon to be a sermon. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like
yeah,
the thing that it is should be the thing that it is, and it
yeah,
shouldn't try to be something else.
yeah.
Because as soon as it tries to be something else, I get suspicious. Other people get suspicious. We start looking at it with through slanted eyes, and we say, there's something's not quite right here.
Yeah, totally. Um, so in terms of entertainment and in terms of filmmaking, uh, were there any specific films, and we touched on a little bit on this, but any
Mhm.
films or filmmakers that you specifically looked at as inspiration for the shift? I know you're a big sci-fi fan. We
Right.
talked a little bit about the commentaries, but were there any specific films that you were just like either that you looked at or that directly inspired the movie?
Yeah, there was a lot of different films that I pulled from for the shift for sure. Christopher Nolan is probably he is one of the greatest filmmakers we have right now. Especially, I mean, what he just pulled off with Oppenheimer is incredible. How in the world do you make a biopic about the guy who basically invented the atom bomb and make that into $1 billion movie? I mean,
Yeah,
nobody else could have done that. He did that. But the other thing, of course, that we know that Christopher Nolan is so good at is science fiction, and he's probably our most preeminent science fiction director right now. If he's the only guy who can get something that's a completely original green lit in
yeah,
Hollywood,
yeah,
and so you know, living here in the 21st century, it's hard not to be influenced by him if you're a filmmaker. But outside of Nolan, I was pulling from all kinds of different things. I mean, as influences as disparate as It's a Wonderful Life to The Family Man, which is a movie with Nicolas Cage that came out about 15 years ago. Um, and gosh, what else? Back to the Future Part Two. There's a little bit of that in the movie.
yeah, yeah,
And there's a lot of different things going on. Book of Eli and yeah, there's it's the shift is in some ways it's a genre mashup. It really is.
yeah. It
It's
is.
as
Yeah,
much a thriller as it is a sci-fi, as it is a romance, as it is a faith, film. And all of, I mean, for my money, all those kind of they sit comfortably next to each other. But for me as a film buff, yeah, I was pulling from all over the place.
Yeah. So speaking of all the genres, and that's 100% accurate, and it's one of the many charms of the movie. In terms of balancing those things, so there's a lot at play thematically in the shift. And I'm sure anyone listening knows this already, but it warrants many rewatches, so rewatch it many times. But for me, one of the most palpable things is the idea of the version of ourselves that we can choose to be. And there are
Mhm.
many versions of that, and we are forced to reckon with that every day. And tonally, and like you said, there are many different genres at play as well in the film. How did you craft that balance? And when I ask that, I mean, was it all on the page in the script? Was a lot of that in editing? I know sometimes scripts can change quite a bit as you go through production, sometimes they don't. How did you find that balance?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and unfortunately, I don't have a really good answer for it. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I think there's a tone that I'm very personally comfortable with, and it's one that is in the shift all the way through. It was something that I don't in a rare case for me, I didn't overthink it.
Yeah.
I kind of went with what felt right.
Yeah.
And there were moments when things were absolutely not right, and we cut them out. And one example I can think of is actually my wife's cameo in the film. She plays Sharon, who is Molly's friend, who's a lush, and there was and there's a moment in the film where Molly turns and refers to Sharon, and Sharon talks back to her, and we did many takes of this moment, um, where and my wife playing Sharon, and she has a drink in her hand, and in just about every single take, my wife went ahead and just like spilled her drink as she's like, just acting a little drunk, and there's the drink spilling out is just water or something. I don't know what it was. It
Yeah.
wasn't alcohol. But my wife just had never actually had a drink in her life. But she she spilled the drink, and it was really funny, and everybody on set laughed, and we did take after take after take like that. And I was just like, this is wrong. This is just wrong. It's really funny. It's a fun moment, but it's wrong.
Yeah.
And so I said, Aaron, my wife's name is Aaron. I said, Aaron, can you give me one take where you don't spill the drink? And that's the take that's in the film,
Yeah.
because that's totally what was correct. Um, Sometimes I think when tone goes wrong, I think it's usually when people are thinking something's really funny, and
Yeah.
so they put it in there, and then it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe it was funny on the day, maybe it's funny to you in the editing room, but that doesn't mean that it's funny to the audience,
Yeah.
or that it's right for the film.
Well,
And
that's the
so it was
bigger
a lot
thing.
of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
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 So it was a lot of that, and I think, look, the film as it stands is different from the script. There are major scenes cut out, and a lot of reorganizing of the timeline, and all kinds of different things that we did in the editing. But I think tonally, I think it's been pretty consistent from the first cut, because even with that first cut, it was really clear. Okay, we're not using we're not going this comical. But then in other
Yeah.
places we did go comical. Sean Astin's character in particular ended up being a lot funnier than he
Yeah.
was on the page, and that was because of Sean. But Sean knew how to play that just right so that it stayed within the reality of the movie. And I think that's really the key to tone, is what is the reality of your movie, and just stick to that.
Yeah.
And I think we found that pretty early on, and so it wasn't something that was that difficult. But I think just because I had a really clear idea of what it should be.
Yeah. Yeah. The tone is one of the most important things, if not the most important, because obviously, how many days did you guys shoot, if you don't mind me asking?
25.
25. Okay. Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're in the moment, and you got like 3 hours and you're shooting something, and it might be hilarious, but it might not supposed to be hilarious. Like
Right.
and you need to be able to foresee that in terms of the whole structure of the film, because otherwise you'll on my first film, there were moments too where like, oh, this is just so good, and then you watch it, in assembly, and you're like, well, that's not what it was supposed to. It was really funny on the day. I enjoy watching it, but it's not supposed to be. That doesn't work. Um,
Yeah.
I
That's
just
also why I always
Yeah,
get 2 takes at least,
yeah,
because there's so many times when I go in the editing room and it's like, "Oh, this was my favorite take," but it turned out it was this other take that I didn't think was so hot.
yeah,
That fits better into the movie.
yeah,
So I always like to get 2 takes no matter what, because maybe I'm wrong.
yeah,
Maybe this first take sure, it was great, but maybe it's not gonna fit. I
yeah.
need I need an option.
Well, that's the important thing too, obviously, about takes is like, I think for a lot of people, and it's become a joke, but it's like, that was great, do it again. The idea of
Right.
getting out different takes is you want to get different tonalities, because
Hmm.
otherwise,
Yeah.
um, just out of curiosity, if you don't mind me asking, how many takes are you in terms of director? Do you try to do? Obviously, it's what's needed, but do you try to
Right.
keep it to like 3 or 4, or do you sometimes go to?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, look, I only have this for feature film, I only have this one experience to draw upon, and
Yeah,
we
yeah,
had 200 scenes to do in 25 days.
yeah.
200 scenes is a lot
That
for
is a
25
lot.
days. And the first day was our biggest day. The first day we did the diner scene, which was 9 3/4 pages long.
In
That
a
is a
day.
heck of a first day. And we did that in one day. And that was our first. And first day, usually you want to do about a page or two, if that, because you're just getting
Wow.
your feet wet and you're trying to
Yeah,
ease
yeah.
into it. We didn't do that at all. We went for the toughest scene in the film and we did it on day one. Um, so after day one, we had 199 scenes to go and 24 days to do it in. So what that means is that you're moving really, really fast.
Yeah,
So generally speaking, we rarely went over 2 takes.
yeah.
That was, 3, 4, we were really pushing it then. If it was a brief bit, sure. But otherwise, yeah, it was really quick. And we had 2 cameras, thankfully. So we were able to get a lot of coverage very, very quickly. Um, but we just didn't have the luxury of going crazy. I think the most takes we ever did was for the final shot of the film because that involves a baby
Yeah.
and that babies don't like to do what you want them to do. So it took us 14 takes to finally get one where the kid did the thing we wanted him to do. Um, but that was the exception,
Yeah,
far and away the exception. I would generally speaking, I think I would love the luxury of 3 to 4 takes at least,
yeah.
but at the same time, when I've got what I want, I'm not gonna artificially drag it out. Like I said,
That's
I'll try to
that's
get
the
at
thing.
least
Yeah.
2, but I'm not gonna drag it out artificially. I know what I'm looking for, and once I see it, we can move on.
Yeah. Well, that's a great testament to preparation. I mean, it's really it's such a different thing to have the script, to know the script in and out, but like when you're
Mhm.
in production, it's like you really, and I think all clearly you didn't actually, but I think a lot of first time filmmakers really struggle with it. I know I did, but you know, you're there are certain elements where you feel like, oh, I've got to do at least 5 or 6 takes, and you don't.
Mhm.
But you have to know exactly what you are trying to get, and you also have to be open to the little changes that happen in the moment.
Totally.
But it's that preparation that I think is essential, and clearly you were prepped. I also can't help but think about Chris getting off of a shoot on Friday and then doing that scene on Monday. That is
I
like
wish
that is
so.
unbelievable.
Chris was supposed to join us for this interview, but unfortunately he got pneumonia.
Yeah.
So I'll tell the story he would have told. It was worse than that. It was far, far worse than that. So because he signed on so late, he'd only gotten the script a week before. And
Oh,
yes, he stopped shooting on Friday, the previous movie that he was on, which was actually called A Biltmore Christmas, which was
yes.
the latest Hallmark movie that he had done. And so he looked at the script and he's like, okay, day one, we've got this big scene. And so he put all of his energy into it. On Sunday, he and Neal McDonough and Rose Reed, who played Tina the waitress, they
Yeah.
all gathered together at the production office and they actually did the one rehearsal we were able to do in the whole shoot. They rehearsed that scene. And so when Chris came into day one, he was completely ready and he did a fantastic job. It helped that scene, he's mostly listening. Neal has the lion's share of the dialogue, but it's a lot of reacting and
It's a lot of reacting.
there's a lot that's going on there for his character and a lot that he does say. So it was a huge lift. And Chris did it and he did a beautiful job. So he gets home that night after this very long shoot. We went over, of course, because it's 9 3/4 pages.
Yeah.
And it's our first
How do
day.
you
Of
not?
course we went over. So it's late at night and he sits down and he's like, okay, what's day two? And he opens up his script and he finds out, oh crap, it's the climax of the relationship scene. It's the scene. If you're familiar with the film, it's the scene in the mall, which is 7 pages, and most of the dialogue is his. And this poor guy
And the
who was
emotion
exhausted,
too. I mean,
and
you're
all the emotion, and
like,
also meeting his co-star the next day. He had to meet her and then go through the most emotional scene of the entire movie with her. So when you watch that scene, if you're familiar with the film, it comes towards the end. Um, just realize that Liz and Chris had met just a couple hours earlier
that's
for the first time,
unbelievable.
and they're having to build all of this chemistry and channel this. And we didn't do any auditions, so they were just hired just on the faith that they could do it and that they would build a chemistry. And I think you watch the scene and you'd never know that that kind of pressure was on
No,
them, and that they were
no.
literally making up this relationship that had not been shot yet in their heads to perform what is essentially their emotional and romantic climax. So yeah, so Chris had to figure all of that with no time, and so he really, that was a baptism by fire for him.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
lead the shoot with those 2 days, we did him no favors whatsoever. We really didn't. But he rose to the occasion, and those are two of the most powerful scenes in the film. And you'd
Yeah.
never know that he basically was flying by the seat of his pants.
Yeah, the magic of filmmaking. No, Chris did
Yeah.
an absolutely astounding job, as did Liz and everybody. And Chris, we hope you feel better.
Yes,
Um,
we do.
and so my last question, Brock, and I've asked this in every interview I've ever done in my life. If you had one bit of advice for your 18-year-old self, what would that bit of advice be?
Oh man, that guy was such a mess.
Weren't we all?
Were we all? I mean, look, I had some things together. I largely didn't. I would say my biggest piece of advice to him is um, number one, people do actually enjoy spending time with you. It's okay. Stop stressing about it so much. And number two, um, wait and be prepared to wait a long time,
Yeah,
but it's going to be worth it.
yeah.
That's
Patience.
what I'd say to him. Yeah, have some patience, because it's not going to come in a hurry, but it'll come. That's what I
That
say to him.
that's beautiful. Brock, you've made an incredible film. I and so many others are enormous fans of it. It was such a pleasure having you on the show, and we cannot wait for what you do next. And please know you are always invited back. I'd love to talk about your next project when that is out
Love to do it.
too. We will be looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you
Uh,
so much, Colin. This has been a lot of fun.
the pleasure was mine, Brock. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.